Good afternoon, everyone. If you see me here again, you can blame Cameron Clark for putting me in this position. I wasn't going to talk. I'm gonna be talking about profitability of the farm in the first place, and I want to start by showing the distribution of profitability in Australian farms. This is the data from for the last 3 years, and it comes from the Dairy Farm Monitoring Project. So it has been compiled by one of my students, Yani Garcia, and it's on the left-hand side, you can see the operating profit margin, which is the same of earnings before interest and tax. So and it's expressed as the percentage of the price per kilogram of milk solids. And you can see in the graph, these are 220 farms in total. Some farms with data for 3 years, some farms with data for 2 years, some farms with only 1 year data. But you can see that if the spectrum is quite big in terms of profitability. If you divide this into quartiles, you have on the right-hand side of the graph of your screen, you have a group or a quartile that is losing money, really on average 5% loss in profit. So those farms have to obviously do something quite quickly, or otherwise many of them will likely be in real trouble or disappear. There is a second group going from the right to the left that is making money, but just in the order of 8% profit in relation to the price received per kilogram of milk solids. There is a third group or quartile doing around the 18–20% profit. And again, this is on average. And there is a final group on the left-hand side of the graph making really good profit, around 30% or more, with some cases 40 and even 50% of the price of the money received per kilogram of milk solids. So I guess this really points out the big differences in profitability across the farms. And you may be wondering how much price of milk obviously relates to this. And so I'm now overlapping in this graph the price of milk received by those farms. So this is not a continuous line. So each farm has a particular price. But what I want to show is that there's a huge variability, as we know, going from $5 to more than $8 per kilogram of milk solids. But that variability really occurs across the whole range of profitability. If anything, there seems to be a bit less variability on the left-hand side of the graph, coincidentally with more farms from Tassie in that particular part of the spectrum making more money. And by the way, this data from the Dairy Farm Monitoring Project is publicly available. So, for me, each farm there is a number, obviously. I don't know who the farms are. And it's all the data is from all the dairy regions except WA and Queensland, because they have some differences in the way of some calculation of the data. So I always been curious to learn from the farmers that really manage things very well. So when you put into that quartile on the left-hand side of the previous graph, the ones that are making more money, and this is again over the last 3 years, including a very bad last couple of years, you can see that what makes the difference is not milk price. If anything, the price in that case was a little bit lower for that group compared to the whole data set. So that means compare that group with the whole data set, including themselves. The stocking rate was higher for the high profitability group. Particularly, the amount of utilized pasture was much higher, 24%. And so was milk per hectare or milk solids per hectare. And very interesting, I think, is the cost of production on the bottom of the graph was 18% lower on average for that group compared to the whole data set. And I'm not going to show it because I won't have time, but let me tell you that I've been doing this for several years on data sets from a lot of countries with pasture-based systems. All, of course, these are practically 90, all of them pasture-based systems, the data we have. And with the data set from South American countries, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, New Zealand, also and Australia, different, probably a total of 7 or 8 data sets. The pattern of this comparison between top farmers and the rest of the farm is always identical, and the average of the whole data set, including all those countries, is around 13% less cost of production compared to the rest of the data. So I guess you may be wondering what the system has to do with this, or is the system related? And the answer really is mostly no, not. Because we don't have data for all types of systems. Obviously, Australia has 97% still of pasture-based systems of different intensity. So the data really is mainly pasture-based systems. But what we can see from any type of data we analyze, we see the same pattern. There is always that distribution that some farms making good profitability, some farms really struggling to make a profit. So it's really, as I think Brody said before in her presentation, is really strongly management related more than system per se. Of course, there are some advantages of systems. And by the way, when we look at that data I show in the whole the Dairy Farm Monitoring Project, when we divide that data by in level of concentrate used in the farms, in all cases, there is a range of profitability going from people earning 40% of or retaining 40% or more of the price received per kilogram of solids, and some really losing. So the point is, in terms of feed, is that regardless of what system we are talking about 50% or more of the cost of production comes from feed. And therefore, that's the connection, of course, that we are doing in the whole event today, I suppose, and also in my presentation in relation to homegrown feed. So obviously, if we can produce that feed at a cheaper price in our own farms, it has to result in a positive effect in profitability. So now we'll move a little bit on the learnings from the years of Future Dairy project. And Future Dairy was a project supported by Dairy Australia, the University of Sydney, New South Wales DPI, and De Laval, and had a big component on feed-based in the first couple of cycles. And of course, I'm not going to bother you with a lot of data here, but I just want to make an analogy with a efficiency meter or profit meter. And if you want to run your farm at a profit of at least 70% of what is possible for your farm, your region, your soils, your kind of characteristics or factors, then you need to know where the 100% is. And the same if we are making the analogy that feed is 50% or more of the cost, we really need to know how far can we go with our production of forages to know at all times where we are. So that's what we did over the years of Future Dairy. So over many years at the plot, paddock, farm, and reserve farm and commercial farm levels. And we were able to manage a lot of different crops and going from left to right there, we have maize was our principal crop for silage with very high yields of 25, 28 tons. This is all with full control of nitrogen and irrigation, all nutrients, but particularly nitrogen and irrigation. Forest rape alone or with ryegrass with 2 or 3 cuts or grazings yielding between 8 and 10 tons of dry matter per hectare, and a legume all in 1 year, in 12 months, we are yielding around 5 tons of dry matter. And all that compared to a pasture that, depending was ryegrass, perennial ryegrass based, with yields of 17, 18 tons, and this is utilized yield converted into milk, or 22 if it was kikuyu-based pasture. And again, remember, this is with full irrigation and full nutrient management. So I guess when you put all the work that we did into a graph like this, we can see that it's a kind of an efficiency toll that we have to pay when we go from the very small plot, when we can control really irrigation at the 98% efficiency in terms of distribution and nutrients and nitrogen the same. And we go to the paddock level and we lose a little bit. We go to the farmlet and we lose another bit. And we go to commercial farms, and even those commercial farms are in the Hunter Valley, a group of 6 farms that work with us. And they were managed to achieve, with double crop maize and ryegrass, with or without forage rape, the annual ryegrass, they were managed to achieve on average 33, 34 tons, which is quite really, really good. And again, of course, under irrigation. So I guess going to the end of the graph, not to waste too much time, what I wanted if we go from triple crop to double crop to single crop to pasture, we see that sort of efficiency decreasing in terms of yields, what we can achieve in a hectare, provided we have, again, irrigation. The last bar on the right-hand side of the graph, the DFMC, that's the average of pasture from all that data that I show in the first graph. From all those 220 farms, around 6.8 tons of dry matter utilized per hectare. And it's not a fair comparison because obviously those 220 farms include a lot of farms without irrigation, and all the rest of the graph is with irrigation. But again, I want to just to point out the differences and the potential here. In terms of water use efficiency, this morning we're talking about, and I really believe that water is the key limiting factor for producing food, not just milk, in Australia into the future. And this is, obviously, I won't expect you to read any of those bars. I wanted to have the visual effect that each of those bars is one treatment or one trial that we did over all those years of research. And there's a lot of combination of crops from maize, sorghum, soybean, forage rape, you name it. And what I wanted to point out is the average of water use utilization. This is apparent water use utilization. It's just the yield divided how much irrigation water we applied. And that is 5.8 tons of dry matter per megaliter. If we compare that with the average of irrigation response on average, and that was the published data for perennial ryegrass pasture in Northern Vic, which is around the 1 ton per megaliter, it shows a huge difference, and particularly when you think of region like Northern Vic, when you have water at $350 or more per megaliter. So I guess again, this is as we go moving into water as a really key limiting factor, we need to be very mindful of how we use that water. Perhaps one of the things that we did with the greatest impact of those years, and that was a long time ago, is when we combined those high forage yield with pasture, and we put 100 cows in 21 hectares at the university farm for 2 years, and a bit more than 2 years. And we were able, with really a lot of intensive managing and control and monitoring of those pastures and feeding, and we were able to, obviously, to grow a lot of high-quality forages based on all the previous yield I showed, and we were able to produce 7,700 liters per cow with only 1 ton of concentrate. And again, I'm not advocating that you should use 1 ton of concentrate only. And what I'm saying is that if you're going to get a yield of around 75 or 80,000 liters, you really don't need a lot more than that. So if you're going to be using 2 or 3 tons per cow, you really should be getting a lot higher yield to make it very efficient. So in terms of solids per hectare, this was a yield of more than 2,000 kilograms of milk solids from the feed produced in those 21 hectares, which is equivalent to 28,000 liters, almost 30,000 liters per hectare. So I guess more important actual result to me were the learnings. And the learnings, this is probably summarizing really years of research into 4 points. But I think the learnings to me are that all these systems, intensive systems, were really achievable, repeatable, and sustainable. We did a lot of measurements in terms of soils and nutrients, and we were able to actually demonstrate that they were sustainable from that point of view. They were highly flexible because, I mean, I just show you a very little portion of the whole thing, but we did look into harvestable combinations, non-harvestable, all grazable, combination of harvestable and grazable, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, there is not a fixed receipt for each farm. It's just really there's a lot of combinations possible. They were more economic than other intensification strategies, and we did that based on all the real results that I showed before. We sort of compared that at the level of commercial farms in simulating that if you have to produce the same milk by doing other options. For example, just buying more concentrate and having not just pasture instead of all the complicated crops. Or, for example, leasing more land. And in that case, consistently the results, and it's all published, the results showed that the option of intensifying through homegrown feed was more profitable, including simulations over 100 years with different prices, et cetera, et cetera. And the last point, perhaps the most important, but it was more complex. That was the feedback we got from the farmers over the years, and farmers, even the farmers that actually achieved a lot more yields, were saying, yes, it's very nice, but it is more complex. And I think I will come back to that at the end, because that complexity is something that I think we can address differently now compared to when we started doing all this work. So just talking about complexity, I like to show these photos because this really, to me, kind of summarizes in just a visual photo what it was all about. That was every single year when we were harvesting the corn for silage, the farm staff was spraying the paddock, and the contractor was the same day sowing the forage crop. So there's no, if you're going to have 3 crops per year, there's no room for leaving it for tomorrow, because you may have a rain tonight, and tomorrow means 2 weeks later, and so on. So really, and that's the kind of the complexity I was talking about before. So moving into losses now, I guess coming back to that analogy that I did with the profit meter or efficiency meter, I really believe that if you want to work in your farm at say a minimum of 70% efficiency of what is possible for your farm, and that will be obviously different for each farm and each region, etc. I really believe that there are three things you need to get right. And the first one is perhaps the one that is most easily overlooked, which is setting goals and planning. And I'll come back to the other ones later on. What do I mean by setting goals and planning? I mean that really I'm talking about here very simple things. I'm talking about what is your economic target. This is your business, so obviously you have to have an economic target, how much money you want to get from your business. And you can do very simply, if you know that target very clearly, and if you know that where you are sitting into that operating margin or EBIT percentage that I was talking about at the beginning, which you should know, and if you don't, please use tools like Database and get involved, because there's a lot of tools available there to actually know. You should know exactly where you are now. So with those two numbers, you can just by setting your target, you can work out how much milk you need to produce to achieve that target. For example, at the bottom of the screen, you have, I know, just to put an example, 250,000 net. That is after, as a EBIT, without paying interest and tax, of course, and suppose $7 per kilogram in solids. If you are at the profit margin of New South Wales average, which is 11%, you need to produce 4.5 million liters and milk around 560 cows if the production is around 8,000 liters per cow. If you are at the average of Tasmania with 24% margin, you only need 262 cows, so you can really run a very high efficient system over there. So then you can work, that very simple equation you can do now at the back of the envelope, will give, in 2 minutes, will tell you how far away or not you are from achieving your target. And then you can, by knowing that, you can start doing something about it. And from that going obviously into terms of what system, what grain level, what forage base, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of inputs is the second thing I have. If you have, to me, if you have your target very clear, you need to really manage your input. Now we're talking obviously about the big chunk of producing home feed on farm. And that graph is for maize, for silage, and each group of bars represent an irrigation treatment, from left to right, going from no irrigation to 100% irrigation, which was, in our case, almost 5 megaliters for the maize crop. And you can see from the two extremes, from the gray on the left to the blue on the right, you can see that you can go from really in the Camden area, from 5 tons with no water and nitrogen to almost 30 tons of my silage. So the main point for this type of information is really where do you need to be according to your targets set in before, and what you're going to do in terms of input management to get there. And if you look at the water use efficiency of this, of course there's no efficiency in the first one because there was no water. You can see that water use efficiency is kind of going down as you increase, obviously, water application. And that's obviously what happens. But even the blue bars, or the yellow things in the blue bars, show an average of 5 tons per megaliter of water, very similar to the data I presented before. So we're still talking about very, very high efficiencies. It is, again, apparent efficiencies. And the same occurs with nitrogen, as it was presented before. I didn't say, sorry, but each individual bar within each color is an increasing level of nitrogen. And obviously, as you apply more nitrogen use efficiency will decrease. But still, even at the highest or the lowest efficiency, we have 100 kilograms of apparent response in terms of dry matter per kilogram of nitrogen. So again, this is not saying or advocating use 300 kilograms of nitrogen for your corn. Remember that you will be, if you extract 25 tons of dry matter from your corn for silage, you will be extracting around 270 to 280 kilograms of nitrogen. So you have to basically put it back in a sense. But I guess the main point I want to make is that this is not advocating one way or another, it's just managing, controlling, knowing where you are, knowing when you want to be, and knowing how much you need to put to get there. The third thing you need to get right, in my opinion, is management per se. And this talking about forests and pastures, some years ago with Cameron and others, we came to this sort of a very simple model that really represents losses in the system. From the 22 tons that we know is possible, we measure every single day with very accurate measurements, to the 5, 7, 6, 7, 8 tons that are achieved on farm. And those losses are obviously some input related, as I explained before, but also a lot of them are related to grazing and feeding management. And I won't have time, obviously, to go to all of them, but I just take one as an example only. And this data in this graph represents all those, that's our real data, and shows milk yield per cow decreasing, pasture utilization on the left, on the vertical axis, decreasing, as milk yield per cow increases. And the point is that in all those studies, concentrate was fed to the cows to produce more milk per cow. But pasture management was not adjusted accordingly. So if you do that, obviously you're going to get what the graph shows, which is substitution, and you'll get more yield per cow, but you're leaving behind your really cheaper pasture. In the data I showed before, with the 100 cows in 21 hectares, we were able to achieve the 77 liters per 100 liters per cow with 22 tons of pasture utilization. So basically, if you really are able to monitor pasture and know exactly how much you are growing, how much you're offering to the cows, and using that extra supplement primarily as additive to the system, and then you can use, obviously, to improve the diet of the cows or whatever. But in the first place, to cover true deficits, you will be using that in an additive way, and that is the way you can get very high yields or relatively high yields per cow with relatively low level of concentrate. So where to next? I will be very brief because I have no more time, but I think I want to come back to that reducing complexity, because to me that was one of we did such an amount of work, and we didn't have the opportunity to really have an extension program around it. We did work with farmers, with a lot of them, and we have that feeling of complexity that I was talking about before. And to me, this is where it was coming, and this is where one of the key roles of technologies and automations will be on your farms, which is basically replacing, removing the complexity out of the management. It's not replacing your decision making, it's just lifting the hierarchy of decision making to set the boundaries, and then leaving automated systems, like, for example, system that will, and we have one in this event, the system that will actually be making more informed decisions for you within the boundaries that you decide. Very briefly, in terms of, because I'm running out of time, very briefly in terms of where to next, and just things for that we can, I guess, keep thinking, is the complexity that I just mentioned. What is coming, I think, is a really much heavier is the eco-friendly nutrient management, and we had some very good examples from Todd Wyman today, the compost effluent. I think we really need to do a lot more on that and really investigate the pros and cons and the actual advantages of the system, because at the end of the day, remember what Dave Shalman showed before, it's not about really how much nitrogen, but where the nitrogen is coming from and how we actually use it. In our case, with all the data I showed before, we were using it, and the slide has gone out. We're using very efficiently. Legume-based systems, biofertilizer, the plant grow promoting rhizobacteria that are showing to increase yields by 20–30%, particularly when nutrients in the soil are limited. And finally, something that I think is coming very soon is the designer crops, how we're going to be basically genetic engineering our crops. Australia is really running behind, and it's something that should be put into the discussion for, I guess, for the whole Australia, not beyond the dairy, in comparison to other countries. And the advances of new forests, that, for example, corn that can regrow after being cut and produce two crops from the same yield. So in summary, I just want to leave you with this profit meter, and as a reflection, if you want to run to 70% at least, get your goal settings, nutrient inputs, and management rights. Thank you very much.
Into this one. Thanks, Yanni. Really great job keeping the time and getting your message across. I think you've presented on some great opportunities. I'd like to open the room to questions. We've got a couple of minutes if anyone has some questions for Yanni. I have a question, if not. So it's a really general question, because like I said, I'm not an expert in this field at all. But I really like how you've presented on sort of what can be achieved by optimizing your use of pasture. What tools would you recommend to farmers to improve their decision making around improving pasture utilization versus concentrate fed?
Well, I think it's the bottom, the key things is really, in my opinion, to monitor pasture, because I guess to me there's been a lot of discussion in industry, but I really think it depends on where you are, what the sort of tools you need. If you just want to go very small, if you are on average and want to increase to 7 or 8 tons of pasture, you probably need a bit of control and nothing else. If you are already working at a very high level and you want to even push that boundary, I cannot see how can you do that without measuring very objectively how much pasture is growing and therefore allocating pasture properly, in my opinion. So coming back to your question, Sab, I think the answer is whatever technology allows you to do that. For some farmers that love to do that and to love to look at the data, it could be a play meter, but most people won't have time to do it. For some others, I think what is really coming is the use of satellite, drones, vehicles, and that's really, it will take on, as I said before, the automation of the decision making, I think, is coming very soon.
Great, thank you. We have a question over here. Michael? Yep.
Yani, just wanted to talk about the corn yields that you had, and even with pasture. Do you look at the milk production per tonne? So we're talking about you getting 27 tonnes dry matter of the corn, but what's the milk out of that high yielding corn?
Thanks, Michael. It was the yields were good, but not as good as our neighbours. Just in case. No, it's a really good question because, and I didn't have time to say, but so it's really good that you ask, Michael, because we put a lot of emphasis on yield on those years, and we really end up having a lot of high yields. But also, when you put a lot of nitrogen and water to a corn crop, particularly at maximum levels, you do get the yield, but you also get a lot of fiber and really lower proportion of starch in the diet. We in all this, in many of those studies, we actually measured everything in the plant, and we have the proof to show how those fraction, particularly fiber in the corn, in the cob increases, and in the leaf, in the stem, and also the digestibility of that fiber decreases, which obviously means that we didn't get as good results in terms of quality of that maize, and that to me it's one of the, I guess to summarize the answer is optimizing more than maximizing yield would really apply here, and it's something that to me is not fully answered, because we can show a lot of different maize silage over those years with very similar digestibility, and going from 18-20% starch to 36-38% starch. So obviously there will be completely different feeds when you are using, in particular, in different systems, and therefore I think we need to do a lot more on that aspect as well.
Okay, join me in thanking Yani for an excellent talk.